Tonight, global reaction to the reported prison death of fierce Kremlin critic Alexei Navalny. The chorus of condemnation.
Putin is responsible.
And the outpouring of tributes.
An extraordinary fighter for human rights.
Trump on trial. The former president ordered to pay nearly $500 million.
A crooked New York State judge will be appealing.
Also back on the Hill, members of the Freedom Convoy return to Ottawa.
Our freedoms are threatened.
Plus, reconsidering the pandemic school shutdowns.
They weren't these sort of hotbeds of transmission.
And a prince's royal reflections.
Look, I love my family.
Harry opens up about his father and his kinship with Canada.
You guys have got snow.
CTV National News with Heather Butts.
Good evening. The sudden death of Vladimir Putin's most vocal opponent, Alexei Navalny, has sparked concern and condemnation from across the globe. The fiercest foe of the Russian president, imprisoned in a remote facility in the Arctic just 24 hours ago, appearing in court. Tonight, one of Canada's top diplomats making it clear he believes Putin is behind the death.
Well, I don't know who else you call responsible if it's not the guy in charge. Mr. Putin is in charge of Russia. He's responsible.
Bob Ray joining other world leaders, including President Joe Biden, in placing responsibility firmly on Putin and praising the courage of the jailed Kremlin critic.
He was somebody who died for his beliefs and his beliefs that he wanted his country to be a democratic place. And that's really what the stakes are.
Navalny was known as a hero to democratic voices and a symbol of resistance. CTV's Heather Wright reports.
Alexei Navalny was last seen yesterday during a court appearance. He was smiling and making jokes. Today, authorities in Russia announced he was dead. They say the anti-corruption activist and fierce critic of Russian President Vladimir Putin lost consciousness after taking a walk inside a penal colony near the Arctic Circle.
He knew that this was always going to be a possibility, and he continued to exhort everyone to continue to fight and to stand up for what is right.
Navalny was serving multiple prison sentences that date back to 2021, when he returned to Russia after he recovered from being poisoned with a nerve agent. He was sentenced for crimes of fraud and extremism, charges international observers call politically motivated and a sham. The 47-year-old's allies say he was denied medical treatment while in custody and was repeatedly placed in solitary confinement. His last social media post was a Valentine's message to his wife Yulia, who made a surprise appearance at the Munich security conference this morning. She received a standing ovation after telling the crowd Putin will pay for what he has done to her husband, her family, and her country. Whether his death was intentional or a result of neglect or mistreatment is still unclear. But U.S. President Joe Biden says the blame falls squarely on Putin.
Putin is responsible. What has happened to Navalny is yet more proof of Putin's brutality.
Navalny's death comes 2 months before the Russian presidential election and a little more than a week before the 2-year anniversary of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Today, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky says Navalny's death is another example of why Putin must be stopped.
Russia has intensified its crackdowns on dissent since it invaded Ukraine, and some predict this will only intensify in the run-up to March's election, which many consider a mere formality. Heather.
CTV's Heather Wright in Toronto. Thank you. Tensions in the Middle East are also in focus tonight. Benjamin Netanyahu is vowing to press ahead on Israel's offensive on southern Gaza, defying international calls to reconsider. Over 1 million displaced Palestinians are sheltering in the southern border city of Rafah ahead of an impending ground assault. Today, new images show Egypt is building a wall along the border to keep refugees from the war-torn enclave out of its territory. Another legal loss today for Donald Trump in a year where he's hoping to win his way back into the White House. A New York judge ordering Trump to pay more than $350 million in a civil fraud case for exaggerating the value of his properties. CTV's Sarah Plowman has the details.
Former U.S. President Donald Trump is playing offense tonight after Justice Arthur Engoron ordered Trump to pay $354 million and banned him from doing business in New York for 3 years.
It's a very sad day for, in my opinion, the country. A New York State judge just ruled that he's crooked as you could get.
Today's ruling, a penalty in a civil fraud trial that found Trump inflated his fortune to secure better loans.
Today we prove that no one is above the law. No matter how rich, powerful, or politically connected you are, everyone must play by the same rules.
Trump has denied wrongdoing and claimed all along it was political prosecution, a vendetta brought on by New York's Attorney General, a Democrat.
This is Russia, this is China, this is the same game. All comes out of the DOJ, it all comes out of Biden. It's a witch hunt.
Today's ruling is one legal woe of many, as the former president campaigns to be the Republican nominee.
This can be potentially devastating for him and his entire business empire.
The verdict comes the day after Trump's first criminal trial was set for March 25th. That case over allegations of hush money paid to a porn star. He's also been charged in Florida for his handling of classified documents, and in Washington, D.C. and Georgia, accused of efforts to overturn the 2020 election. Trump has pleaded not guilty on all charges. Trump's sons were also ordered to pay $4 million each and are banned from doing business in New York for 3 years. In his decision, the justice wrote that Trump and the other defendants are incapable of admitting to the error of their ways. Trump's lawyers plan to appeal. Heather.
All right, Sarah, thank you. Exactly 2 years after shutting down parts of the nation's capital, the Freedom Convoy movement is returning to Parliament Hill this weekend. CTV's Annie Bergeron-Oliver tells us security is ramping up, but organizers say this time the method to deliver the message will be different.
2 years ago tonight, police were gearing up to clear out the convoy protest that had taken over downtown Ottawa. Now, Freedom Convoy supporters are coming back.
You are the scum of the earth!
But this time, they say it's not a protest.
It's important that we remember what happened with the Emergencies Act, but we also want to remember the hope and the love and all the good things that came with the convoy as well.
Freedom!
Hundreds of Freedom Convoy supporters are expected to gather on Parliament Hill tomorrow for speeches and a march. Some residents, though, are hoping not to relive a difficult chapter.
Celebrations themselves are beautiful. I'm not enthusiastic about reliving it.
We saw weeks go by before we saw the cops there at all. It was just shocking, the whole thing.
Supporters say the movement has gotten a boost since a federal court judge ruled against the use of the Emergencies Act, saying the decision to issue the proclamation does not bear the hallmarks of reasonableness and was not justified.
What had occurred is we had our ruling government weaponize police officers, weaponize the establishment.
The supporters want an apology from the Prime Minister and others involved in making the decision to invoke the act. What Blair Ector wants is compensation from those same government officials. He's filed a lawsuit against the Prime Minister and others on behalf of 20 businesses and individuals who all had their accounts frozen by financial institutions.
One of our clients, this is a 17-year-old kid at the time, basically, and his dad went down to the Freedom Convoy protest. And then not only did he not go to Ottawa, he in fact opposed the Freedom Convoy. He wasn't even supportive of the Freedom Convoy. And he had his bank account frozen because it was a joint account with his father.
Ottawa police say they are in contact with the organizers of tomorrow's protest and have what they're calling a robust plan in place to ensure there is no vehicle-based demonstrations, Heather, anywhere near the downtown core.
Annie, thank you. Another pandemic measure that stirred up divisions across the country was closing schools. There was no consistent approach from province to province, and new research is now questioning whether the doors needed to close at all. Here's CTV's Siobhan Morris.
So we're going to do one at a time.
They were challenging for kids, limited moms and dads' ability to work. But school shutdowns during the pandemic weren't key to shutting down transmission of COVID-19.
They weren't these sort of hotbeds of transmission that we were concerned they would be.
That's the finding of a study out of McMaster University. A review of tens of thousands of reports, databases, and websites going back to May 2020.
Those initial plans of stay-at-home orders to reduce the spread of the virus made a lot of sense at the beginning because of the lack of information that we had.
But as the months passed, as we understood COVID better, other tools became more powerful.
Vaccination was really important to helping mitigate spread. Masking and then test to stay policies also seem to be really important.
To keep patterns of transmission in schools roughly in line with what we saw in the broader community.
Sometimes these policies were very controversial at the time, but this study shows that they were indeed helpful in reducing transmission within the schools.
No hard feelings for this mom.
I think they did the best with the information they had at the time. I don't see what else they could have done.
Neil Stremko acknowledges COVID-19 is unique.
The knowledge that we have from this virus, may be more or less applicable to future pandemics, depending on how similar the virus is.
But some of the data we have is flawed, and there are lessons to be learned.
We squandered so many opportunities to collect better quality data prospectively in real time.
More data can only help.
Being able to adapt our recommendations and be nimble as new evidence becomes available, and also as the context changes.
With things like vaccines, as far as parents are concerned about that next time,
there has to be a much larger reason to close the schools. There has to be something much bigger because we know what we can do to protect our children and protect society's health.
Researchers say policies like mandatory quarantining, cohorting, and hybrid learning may have had little to no effect on reducing COVID-19 transmission. And they say those policies were especially difficult on families of low income and living in remote communities. Heather.
Siobhan Morris for us tonight. Thank you. And there's more fallout over another controversial pandemic protocol, the ArriveCAN app. It turns out the firm that landed the highly criticized deal for the app had also done tens of millions of dollars in other government business. CTV's Jeremy Charon has been looking into this for us. Jeremy.
Heather, Public Services and Procurement Canada has confirmed IT firm GC Strategies was awarded 34 government contracts since 2015, worth nearly $60 million, but the government says they won't get any more. In a statement to CTV News, the PSPC says all of the contracts with GC Strategies have either expired or been suspended, and it adds that the firm is no longer eligible for government tenders. This all coming after a damning Auditor General's report this week about the government's management and contracting practices related to the ArriveCAN app, specifically raising red flags over a non-competitive process that led to the initial contract going to GC Strategies.
This is an $80,000 app that ballooned to $60 million. We have a two-person firm working out of their basement being paid $20 million and whining and dining senior Liberal officials. Will these Liberals end the cover-up and join Conservatives in calling for an expanded RCMP investigation?
Looked at and obviously already troubled about the findings that there are in that report, and we have taken into account all the recommendations that are in the report, and many of them have been put into place already.
The Auditor General's report also confirmed previous reports that matters related to certain employees and contractors had been referred to the RCMP to be investigated for potential criminality. This week, Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre wrote to the RCMP requesting it expand its investigation to include the ArriveCAN matter as a whole. Heather?
All right, Jeremy, thank you. A judge has ruled a court challenge over Saskatchewan's pronoun law can go ahead. The controversial law requires parental consent for children under the age of 16 who want to change their name or pronouns at school. Lawyers for advocacy groups argue the law limits the rights of gender-diverse young people. The province says it doesn't breach the charter and is in the best interest of children. In Montreal tonight, a man is facing murder charges in a double stabbing that left his mother and a neighbor dead, another person critically injured, and a community shaken. CTV's Kelly Gregg has the latest.
Police were still on the scene outside this Vaudreuil-Dorion apartment building, where 2 women were killed and another sent to hospital. On Friday morning, 44-year-old Fabio Puglisi appeared at the Valleyfield courthouse, charged with 2 counts of second-degree murder and 1 each of attempted murder and aggravated assault. The victims are his mother, 68-year-old Elisabetta Puglisi Cauchi, and a 53-year-old neighbor, Manon Blachard. On Thursday, police were called just before noon for reports of multiple stabbings. Puglisi appeared to have both hands bandaged when he was charged via video conference, and he consistently spoke over the lawyers and the judge, pleading not guilty.
He says some sort of thing, but it's the psychiatrist who will decide the state of mind of Mr. Puglisi.
Records show that Puglisi was set to appear in court last week in another case, where he's alleged to have assaulted a woman back in November. He was also found not criminally responsible twice in separate criminal cases in 2012 and 2020. Puglisi has now been ordered to undergo an evaluation of his mental health.
The next step in the process will be that Mr. will be evaluated by a psychiatrist in Pinel, and then they will render a decision to see if he's fit to stand trial.
The accused will now head to the Pinel Institute to be evaluated. His next court date is set for February 22nd. Kelly Gregg, CTV News, Valleyfield.
A Calgary man has been ordered to spend at least 14 years behind bars for savagely beating his girlfriend's 3-year-old daughter to death, all because she interrupted his video game. 30-year-old Justin Bennett was convicted in 2021 of second-degree murder in the death of Ivy Wick. She died of traumatic brain injuries in 2017. Bennett had confessed to undercover police that he smashed her head and threw her against a wall. Coming up, CTV's W5 on the ground in Panama.
Stand back.
Woo! Oh my God. Huge protests over a Canadian-owned copper mine. Plus, TD Bank customers cash in on a class action. A Canadian-owned company was the focus of a violent uprising in Panama that brought the nation to a standstill for weeks. CTV's Avery Haynes and the W5 team found themselves caught up in the tensions.
It's one of the largest copper mines in the world, and it's been idle for 3 months, following an uprising that was at times violent against the Canadian company.
Incoming. Just stand back.
Woo! Oh my God.
Back up.
We have just come inside the university, which is sealed off from the police, but this tear gas is so intense. I can barely even get a deep breath in. My entire face feels like it has been burned from the tear gas.
The mine was ordered shut down after hundreds of thousands took to the streets in Panama, blockading the roads and occupying the University of Panama.
One of the things they boast about is that the mine has given a lot of value to Panama, that it's given fruits to Panama, but that is a lie.
But an idle mine is a potential environmental catastrophe, and safely closing it can take years and hundreds of millions of dollars.
This does need to be dealt with some urgency.
First Quantum's CEO says they're now pitching Panama a solution. We'll pay for the cleanup as long as we can continue mining.
How do you think that's going to go over in Panama if that does happen? If the mine cranks back up again?
I think it's to be navigated as part of the questions as to how that is resolved, but certainly some level of activity is required.
The reality is the world needs copper. First Quantum says the copper from this one mine last year is enough for 6 million electric vehicles or 10,000 large wind turbines. Avery Haynes, CTV News, Panama City.
And you can watch Avery's full report on W5. Panama's war with Canada airs tomorrow at 7 p.m. right here on CTV. When we come back, Canada goes for bronze, fighting a controversial ruling in Olympic figure skating. Canada is appealing a decision by the International Skating Union to award Russia a medal despite a doping case in the 2022 Beijing Olympics. Russia skated to gold at the team event while Canada came fourth. Last month, a Russian skater was disqualified for doping, and the country was downgraded to bronze rather than bumping Canada up. Skate Canada said in a statement today its appeal was rooted in a commitment to fairness, transparency, and integrity of the sport. If you are a TD Bank customer, you may be entitled to part of a multi-million-dollar payout. Today, an Ontario court approved a $16 million class action settlement over fees for insufficient funds. The lawsuit focused on whether the bank charged customers multiple times without properly disclosing it. And Canada's biggest airline continues to recover from the pandemic losses. Air Canada's profits soared by $16 million in the last quarter of 2023 compared to a year earlier. Despite the sturdy earnings, the carrier is being cautious while growing its flight capacity this year. Still ahead, Harry and Meghan visiting Canada.
The strength of the family unit coming together.
And reflecting on the King's cancer diagnosis. Finally tonight, a visit full of inspiration and some reflections. Prince Harry touching on his father's cancer diagnosis as he and some other famous faces met with athletes at the Invictus Games training camp. Here's CTV's BC Bureau Chief Andrew Johnson.
From throwing rocks with a Canadian crooner to bonding with Invictus Games alumni, Prince Harry is touting the new adaptive winter sports coming to next year's Invictus Games in Vancouver and Whistler.
There is a reason that the Invictus Games has come back to Canada, because you guys have got snow.
And it was in the snow at Whistler after 2 slides down the skeleton track yesterday where Prince Harry also opened up about flying home to London to see his father after the King's cancer diagnosis.
Look, I love my family. The fact that I was able to get on a plane and go and see him and spend any time with him, I'm grateful for that.
Harry also hinted at the possibility his dad's illness could help heal the rift between the Sussexes and the royal family.
Yeah, I'm sure. Throughout all these families, I see it on a day-to-day basis. The strength of the family unit coming together.
Harry and Meghan's trip to BC is highlighting the deep bond between the Duke and Invictus competitors.
The smiles on the faces that I've seen over the last few days, it proves why we do what we do.
Men and women serving their countries who are now paying a steep physical or mental price. People like Edmonton's Mark Beer.
He's just like us, really, with that lived experience, and he's carrying his own things.
Athletes we spoke to this week from Ukraine to Colombia are expressing gratitude to Prince Harry for everything he's done to grow the Invictus Games and create a community for people who, despite their sacrifices, too often feel forgotten. Andrew Johnson, CTV News, Vancouver.
Certainly some incredible athletes. That is our show for this Friday evening. I'm Heather Butts for all of us at CTV National News. Thank you for watching. Good night, and I'll see you again tomorrow.
CTV National News, Canada's #1 newscast.